What if you could know everything? And I don't mean just book smart. I mean everything. What if every secret the universe holds, from the silent dance of distant nebulae to the frantic, unspoken desires of the human heart, was suddenly yours to command? What if every lever of power, every hidden string that makes the world turn, was laid bare right in front of you? A grand machine waiting for its new master. This isn't just a fantasy. For one man, it was a very real and very tempting possibility. Welcome back to Chronicles of Old Tales, where we dig into the stories that whisper to the most ambitious and dangerous parts of the human spirit. Today's story is about a brilliant, unbelievably arrogant scholar from Renaissance Germany. He looked at the world, at God, at the very fabric of the reality, and saw it not with wonder, but with contempt. It was a puzzle he had already solved, and he was bored. So, he decided to make a transaction. He was willing to trade his eternal soul for ultimate, boundless power, absolutely convinced he was intelligent enough to outmaneuver the devil himself. But as he began to bend reality to his every whim, he started to see the terrifyingly small print on his demonic contract. What happened next is more than just a ghost story. It's a journey into the true price of absolute power, and a terrifying, slow descent into a hell he meticulously built with his own two hands. Was he a monster for making such a choice, or is there a part of his ambition that lives secretly in all of us? Our story is inspired by a real, tangible historical figure, a German alchemist, astrologer, and magician who roamed through the 1500s named Johann Georg Faust. While the real Johann was often dismissed by his contemporaries as a fraud, a braggart, and a charlatan, his life, or rather, the rumors about his life, gave birth to a legend that has captivated and terrified people for centuries. The legend of Doctor Faustus. In the immortal legend, Doctor Faustus is a man of staggering, almost monstrous intellect. Picture a mind so vast it feels like a prison. He had devoured every book in every known library, mastered philosophy, medicine, law, and theology until the words blurred into a meaningless hum. He debated every great mind of his age, not for the joy of discovery, but for the cold satisfaction of systematically dismantling their arguments, leaving them speechless and humiliated. But all that knowledge, all that intellectual conquest, just left him feeling profoundly, achingly empty. Imagine standing on the highest peak of human thought, only to find the air thin and the view barren. He saw the intricate clockwork of the universe, not as a divine miracle, but as a solved puzzle, a predictable machine whose gears he understood perfectly. And frankly, he was suffocated by his own genius. He would sit in his study, surrounded by priceless leather-bound tomes, and feel nothing but a deep, seething resentment. What is the point of knowing how the stars move if you cannot command them to change their course? What is the use of understanding human anatomy down to the last sinew if you cannot conquer the final, undignified insult of death itself? He looked at his colleagues, with their simple faith and their mundane research, with a contempt that bordered on disgust. They were ants scurrying in predictable patterns, while he was meant to be an eagle, soaring above them all. The laws of God and man, to Faustus, were not moral imperatives. They were merely suggestions, a set of flimsy guidelines for lesser minds, for the herd. His arrogance was not just a character flaw, it was the very core of his being, the sun around which his entire existence orbitated. He truly, unshakably believed he was so brilliant, so exceptional, that he could walk into the darkest, most forbidden realms of existence and come out the other side not just unharmed, but in absolute control. So, with a chilling finality, he turned his back on human knowledge, which he now saw as a child's playground, a gilded cage. He boxed up his medical texts, his legal scrolls, his theological treatises, and pushed them into the dark corners of his study. His gaze was now fixed on a different kind of knowledge, a power that was far older, infinitely more potent, and, as he would soon discover, eternally more dangerous. Faustus transformed his study into a sanctuary of shadows. He locked the doors, barred the windows, and let the dust settle like a shroud over the relics of his former life. His new library was composed of books that weren't meant for mortal eyes, ancient scrolls, and grimoires that spoke of art so dark they were only ever mentioned in hushed, terrified whispers in the dead of night. Texts allegedly bound in human skin, their pages filled with ink mixed with blood and nightshade, their symbols seeming to writhe and recoil from the light. This was his new, all-consuming obsession. He began with the lesser rituals, a cautious dipping of his toes into the infernal waters. He chanted forgotten words that felt like gravel in his throat, words that made the air grow thick and filled his study with acrid, sulphurous smoke. At first, there was nothing. Only silence. A deep, profound, and to him, insulting silence. The silence that answered his calls was a wound to his immense pride. He was Doctor Faustus, the titan of intellect. How dare the universe, how dare the very legions of hell ignore him? This perceived slight only fueled his desperation. He pushed further, his rituals growing more elaborate, more dangerous, more blasphemous. He performed rites that desecrated holy names, that inverted sacred symbols, that mocked the very foundations of the world he now so thoroughly despised. For a moment, a flicker of primal fear, the kind a child feels in the dark, touched his heart. But he immediately, violently, snuffed it out with another dose of his potent intellectual arrogance. Fear was for the simple. Fear was for the flock. He was the shepherd of his own destiny. Then, one tempestuous night, as lightning tore across the sky and thunder shook the very foundations of his home, he decided to stop asking and start demanding. He didn't just draw a circle on the floor for protection, he drew it as a stage, a summoning platform to command a guest. He gathered every ounce of his will, his rage, his ambition, and bellowed a name he'd found in the most forbidden tome, a name that was said to be a key to hell's own gates. The very air in the room seemed to shatter. It grew ice cold, the kind of cold that doesn't just chill the skin but sinks into the bone, into the soul. The candles on his desk, which had been burning steadily, sputtered and died as if snuffed by an unseen breath, plunging the room into an oppressive, suffocating darkness. And in that thick, absolute black, a voice answered. It wasn't a roar or a shriek. It was calm, cultured, almost gentle, and it was dripping with an ancient, chilling amusement that was more terrifying than any monstrous growl. The invitation had been sent, and it had just been accepted. The silence was broken, and what was about to step through the veil would change not only his life, but the very definition of damnation. Out of the deepest shadows, a figure began to coalesce. This was no horned, drooling monster, no grotesque beast from a peasant's fairy tale. The being that emerged was the picture of nobility, a gentleman dressed in fine, dark silks, with sharp, intelligent features and an air of effortless grace. He moved with a predator's silence. Only his eyes, two abyssal pits of darkness, gave him away. They held the cold, dead light of burnt-out stars and emptiness that spoke of witnessing epochs turn to dust. This was Mephistopheles, a prince of the damned, a servant to the eternal lord of damnation. Faustus, despite a tremor of pure, primal fear that threatened to buckle his knees, held his ground. He forced his back straight, his chin high. "I summon you," he said, his voice straining to project a command it did not feel. The demon simply smiled, a slow, knowing curl of the lips that was both a greeting and a mockery. "So, you did. Many people call. Very few are worth the visit. Their souls are so small, their ambitions so petty. But you have a fire that interests us. A magnificent, glorious arrogance. Tell me, Doctor, What could a man who believes he knows everything possibly want? This was the moment Faustus had rehearsed in his mind 1,000 times. He laid out his terms not as a plea but as a list of non-negotiable demands. He wanted 24 years. For the duration of those 24 years, Mephistopheles, this prince of hell, would be his personal slave, his attendant, his cosmic errand boy. He demanded limitless knowledge, the power to warp time and space, to fly through the cosmos, to witness the birth and death of stars. He demanded the ability to satisfy every single worldly desire, from the most refined intellectual pursuits to the basest, most carnal urges. He was utterly certain that with 24 years and the keys to the universe, he could discover some cosmic loophole, some forgotten clause in the laws of reality, and cheat the demon at his own gain. This part of the tale, of course, is pure literary legend, made famous and immortal by playwrights like Christopher Marlowe in his masterpiece, Doctor Faustus. Mephistopheles listened with the placid patience of a mountain, his faint smile never wavering. "All this can be yours," he said, his voice as smooth as oiled silk. "Power, pleasure, knowledge beyond mortal comprehension. For a price, of course, a trifle, really, a formality." He gestured with a long, pale hand, and a contract appeared on the table between them, a scroll of what looked like human parchment. The words on it glowed with a faint, sickly, malevolent light. "A deed of gift," the demon continued softly. "Your soul, to be collected, with interest, when your 24 years have expired." Did Faustus hesitate? Not for a second. A soul, he reasoned with the cold, arrogant logic that had defined his life, was just an abstract concept, a phantom, a fairy tale cooked up by priests to keep the ignorant masses in line. But power, knowledge, those were real. They were tangible. They were everything. "A bargain," Faustus declared. He took the small, sharp dagger the demon offered, sliced a deep gash into his own forearm, and signed the glowing contract in his own hot, steaming blood. The moment the final stroke was complete, the document vanished in a flash of black, soundless fire. Faustus screamed, but not in pain. He felt a surge of raw, untamed energy, a flood of information so immense he could feel the planet spin on its axis, hear secrets being whispered on the far side of the world, see the lines of time itself stretching before him. He had won. He had traded a fantasy for reality, or so he thought. But what do you think if you were offered such a deal? Is there anything you would trade your soul for? Let us know your price in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe to Chronicles of Old Tales so you don't miss our next descent into the legends of ambition. The change was instantaneous and absolute. The man who was once a prisoner in a dusty, book-filled study now stood astride the world like a vengeful god. The cage was gone, replaced by a universe of infinite possibility. He snapped his fingers, and the stone walls of his study dissolved, replaced by the marble colonnades of a phantom Roman villa, where he found himself dining with the ghost of Alexander the Great. He didn't just see the historical figure, he conversed with him, learning the strategies, the ambitions, the secret fears of the man who conquered the known world. He whispered a single, sibilant word, and from the mists of time, Helen of Troy appeared before him, her beauty as legendary and heartbreaking as the poets claimed. He possessed her. But it was like embracing a beautifully crafted statue. There was no warmth, no spirit, no soul behind the perfect facade. These incredible feats are the very heart of the literary legend, designed to show the sheer, intoxicating scale of his newfound power. He commanded Mephistopheles to take him flying, and they soared through the cosmos, watching stars being born and fiery explosions of light, and ancient galaxies slowly dying, collapsing into black holes. He conjured mountains of gold and jewels, more wealth than 1,000 kings could ever spend, and built impossible palaces that defied the laws of physics, their spires piercing the clouds. For a time, a few short, brilliant years, it was glorious. It was a fever dream of hedonism. He lived a dozen lifetimes in a whirlwind of absolute power and unrestrained pleasure, with the silent, ever-present Mephistopheles as his guide and a neighbor. But a strange sickness, a spiritual rot, began to creep into the heart of his new reality. The most exquisite foods, prepared by phantom chefs, turned to ash in his mouth. The most beautiful faces, summoned from history and myth, seemed like empty, lifeless masks. The boundless knowledge he had craved so desperately brought him no wisdom, no peace, only a deep, crushing, and profound cynicism. He could see the atomic structure of a rose, perceive the quantum vibrations of its petals, but he could no longer feel its beauty or enjoy its scent. He understood the physics of a lover's touch, but could not feel the warmth of affection. He had gained the entire world, every secret, every pleasure, every power, but in doing so, he had somehow lost his ability to actually connect with and enjoy any of it. He was the master of everything, and the proprietor of nothing. The awful, soul-crushing truth of his bargain was finally dawning on him, like a slow, cold sunrise over a dead world. This is the very essence of the Faustian bargain, a term that has entered our language to describe his exact predicament. The prize is always poisoned. What you gain is always, tragically, worth so much less than what you irrevocably give up. Faustus finally saw the truth. He wasn't a master of cosmic power. He was a tourist in his own life. A prisoner in a magnificent cage, a slave, not to Mephistopheles, but to appetites that could never, ever be truly satisfied. In a fit of panicked desperation, a desperate attempt to prove the demonic power could be bent to a noble purpose, Faustus tried to use his abilities for good. He traveled to a village wasting away from the plague. He strode through the streets, filled with the dead and dying, and commanded the sickness to leave. But his hell-born magic, rooted in destruction, could not heal. It could only warp. The sick were twisted into monstrous, screaming shapes, their bodies contorted in an agony worse than death. Horrified, he fled. He tried to end a brutal war, appearing before the rival kings and commanding them to lay down their arms. But his meddling only sowed more confusion, paranoia, and chaos, leading to even greater bloodshed. He had learned the most horrifying and fundamental lesson of his pact. Power that comes from hell can only corrupt and destroy. It is sterile. It cannot create beauty. It cannot heal wounds. It certainly cannot inspire love or bring peace. It can only mimic, twist, and ultimately annihilate. He finally summoned Mephistopheles, his voice no longer commanding, but cracking with the rage of a swindled fool. "You tricked me," he screamed, his words echoing in the empty, gravity-defying hall of his latest palace. "This isn't power. This is a curse, a shadow play. There's no substance, no meaning to any of it." The demon's calm, amused mask never slipped. His chillingly patient smile remained. "I gave you exactly what you asked for, Doctor," Mephistopheles replied, his voice devoid of all emotion. "You wanted the world. I gave it to you. Its secrets, its pleasures. You wanted to be a god. Now you see what it is like to know everything but feel nothing. It is not my fault that you didn't understand what your soul was worth until after you'd already sold it." In that moment, Faustus realized he had been the ultimate fool. His brilliant mind, the one thing he treasured above all else, the intellect he believed made him superior to all of mankind, had led him to make the single stupidest, most short-sighted trade in the history of all existence. This is the tragic core of every story we tell here at Chronicles of Old Tales. The moment of realization, when the bill for one's choices finally arrives. The 24 years, which once seemed like an eternity of glorious conquest, flew by in a blur, a nauseating fever dream. The once proud scholar, the man who saw himself as a god in waiting, was now a hollowed out, trembling shell of a man. He was haunted not by vengeful spirits, but by the ghosts of his own empty pleasures, by the memory of every meaningless triumph. He was tormented by the constant, relentless, ticking clock of his own damnation. On the final night of the 24th year, he barricaded himself in the same dusty study where his terrible journey had begun. The forbidden books now seemed to mock him from their shelves. He frantically tried to pray, to recite the holy words he had once scorned, but they felt like ash and broken glass in his mouth. The words were empty because his heart was empty. He tried to repent, but his soul was a barren desert, scorched by years of cynical indulgence, unable to produce a single, genuine drop of remorse. He was on his hands and knees, frantically drawing protective circles and holy symbols on the floorboards, trying to ward off the very forces he had once so arrogantly demanded to command. As the storm raged outside, nearing the one from that fateful night 2 years earlier, Mephistopheles appeared. He did not step from the shadows this time. He simply was there. He was no longer a refined nobleman, but a looming, formless horror, a shape of pure darkness that seemed to absorb all light and hope from the room. "It is time, Doctor," the demon whispered, and the voice came not from one place, but from every corner of the room at once. "The bill has come due." Faustus screamed a thin, pathetic sound. He pleaded. He groveled. He tried to bargain away his knowledge, his power, the phantom treasures he had accumulated, anything. But the contract was final. It was signed in blood. As the grandfather clock in the hall began to chime the first stroke of midnight, the walls of the study seemed to dissolve into nightmare. Hell did not just open a gate, it rose up to claim its prize. The legends surrounding the death of the real Johann Faust are themselves violent and mysterious, with some claiming an alchemical explosion destroyed his room as the devil came to collect his due. His mutilated body found gruesomely displayed. For our legendary Faustus, the end was far more personal, far more terrifying. He wasn't just killed, he was unmade. His consciousness was flayed, his identity dismantled piece by agonizing piece, his soul seized and dragged screaming into an eternity of pure, undiluted regret. There, he would have all of time to ponder the single, catastrophic moment of pride and arrogance that cost him everything. If you found this story terrifyingly fascinating, a chilling look into the abyss of human ambition, then be sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more tales of ambition and its dark, often brutal, consequences. And let us know in the comments, what's the one thing you might be tempted to make a deal for: fame, wealth, love? We want to know what your Faustian bargain would be. The story of the man who sells his soul is not just a spooky tale to tell around a campfire. It's a profound and enduring legend born from the murky life of a real person, Johann Faust, whose mysterious existence and violent death inspired centuries of storytelling. Playwrights and poets, from the great Christopher Marlowe to Germany's own Goethe, took the framework of this strange man's life and crafted a powerful, timeless warning that resonates with us even today. The phrase Faustian bargain is now a permanent part of our language, a shorthand for any deal where a person trades their integrity, their morality, their very self, for some short-term gain. Whether it's for power, fame, or money. The legend sticks with us, it haunts us, because it asks a question that every single one of us has to face in our own lives, in big ways and small. What are the limits of our ambition? What are we willing to do to get what we want? And what is the real price of getting everything we think we want? Here at Chronicles of Old Tales, we believe these stories matter because they hold a mirror up to humanity. The story of Faustus is a tragedy not because the devil wins, but because a man with brilliant, limitless potential chose to throw it all away. He gained a world of illusions, a kingdom of shadows, and in exchange, he lost the only thing that was ever truly real, himself. It's a chilling, eternal reminder to be careful what you wish for. You just might get it.